The Monday Mind Mission, New York City, wet and cold. Here in the Toad Bunker, what are we reading? What should you be looking at? A man named Edward deBono. He wrote a book, The 6 Thinking Hats. deBono, in many ways, I think, is one of the great unacknowledged, unspoken godfathers of the entire way of thinking about thinking, meta-thinking, that gave rise to subsidiary movements like NLP. deBono made a radical observation that raw intelligence, raw computing power of the brain, and thinking skill were two different things. Someone could be highly, highly intelligent in the sense of having a great deal of raw CPU, raw processing power, yet have very poor thinking skills. He observed the inverse of this. People could have relatively low native CPU power, yet superior thinking skills. Thus, part of deBono's agenda has been to teach people to think, to teach the skill set of thinking. So when he wrote a book like 6 Thinking Hats, what he's talking about are different frames, different master frames that someone utilizes to organize their thinking. So when any problem is approached, he says, put on the 6 thinking hats. Think about it in terms of, think about it using the methodology of each of those 6 hats and see where each one leads you, and then compare them. This was a fairly radical departure from the idea that IQ automatically implied high thinking skill and low IQ or low native intelligence naturally implied low thinking skill. He divided those two. He said, it is very, very possible to take someone of modest native thinking capacity and yet teach them to think very skillfully. deBono made another interesting observation that I think we're taking a long time to appreciate, that slow, plodding, methodical thinking sometimes could lead to, and often did, very frequently, led to much better quality results than fast, authoritative, personality-driven thinking. So I'll show you another book. This is an important one. This goes very well with deBono's six thinking hats. This one is The Invisible Gorilla, and other ways our intuitions deceive us, The Invisible Gorilla. So deBono and his six thinking hats argue very strongly for the idea that thinking is a skill. Thinking can be broken down into many different styles of thinking, and people can be taught to master multiple styles of thinking. Some people are very, very naturally competent in one style of thinking and naturally very deficient in another style of thinking. So his idea was to teach a balanced approach where, say, a classroom would be taught to learn every one of those thinking styles, every one of those schools of thought, looking at a set of worldviews, a set of filters for looking at things, and then see the problem through at least 6 different points of view or 6 different filters. Where the invisible gorilla takes the other position and observes that many bad decisions or many faulty decisions were made by people depending on charisma or strength of personality or glibness of argument. So both of them are very important. Here's what I'm going to propose. Here's something I think you should be thinking about. NLP is a little bit deficient. It doesn't really talk about thinking and thinking skill. It goes off into a lot of relatively trivial little side rooms, but it doesn't really get to the main thing, which is how skillful a thinker you are. That's very important, thinking skill. So I'll propose an even more radical concept that certain psychoanalysts were talking about in the middle of the 20th century, that in many cases, stupidity, what we think of as stupidity, is not the same thing as naivete or ignorance or lacking information. In many cases, stupidity is actually a very active, energetic process of getting it wrong. So stupidity can actually be a learned, deeply encoded set of bad thinking skills or maladaptive thinking skills. And I can tell you some amazing stories about people that had just radical degrees of maladaptive thinking skills. So part of the exercise, part of this granularity truth value thing we're working on is to consider this. We're going to take a little bit of a piece out of Bandler's playbook. If you wanted to teach someone to be very stupid and to do very stupid things, if you wanted to teach someone to actively be an incompetent thinker, so think of that as an exercise we're going to do for part of the day, or we're going to use a day for competence and incompetence, and you wanted to teach somebody all the skills in this fine detail, and everybody in the seminar or the class got together and really thought about how can we really teach somebody to make bad decisions and think very stupidly and have terrible outcomes. What would be the skill set necessary to do that? And you think, why should I think about this? Well, the reason you should think about it is because a lot of people are really experts at making bad decisions, and they're experts at thinking poorly. So you might as well take some time and understand how bad thinking works, as not just a lack of information, or not just an innocence, or not just a simplicity, but actually actively getting it wrong. How do people do that? People should be, especially NLP people, should be fascinated with that. How do we generate a state of extreme incompetence? How do we teach people a state of extreme incompetence? For the obvious reason that we use that as a contrast when we go to teach people, well, what is competent thinking? So we're going to have to work on a contrastive analysis between competent and incompetent thinking. I will leave it there.